While that's working its way through the process, we also want to try to get a legislative solution. So we want Congress to step in and fix the problem that it created when it passed this law in the first place.
In today's political climate, change in Washington is the only guarantee. And when small businesses aren't plugged in, they pay the price. That's why NSBA keeps you hardwired to what's happening inside DC.
Hi there, I'm Molly Brogan with the National Small Business Association. Thank you for joining us for today's Hardwired, where we keep you connected with everything happening on policy in Washington, D.C. This week, we're talking about the Corporate Transparency Act. I'm sure y'all have heard a little bit about it, and we're going to hear right from Todd McCracken, our president and CEO, about what's happening with the CTA, what it is, and how it might impact your business. Todd, can you tell us a little bit about the CTA? What is it? Why did it start? Why are we dealing with it?
Well, it's a law we've been fighting at some level for more than a decade. Promoters of the law say, well, we need to get a handle on money laundering. And money laundering is a real problem. But their solution to it is to force small companies, and only small companies, to report extensively on their so-called beneficial owners. There's big problems with this. A, it's only on small companies. B, the definition of beneficial owner is vague and expansive and encompasses people who are probably just advisors to the company in many cases. People don't quite know who falls into that category. It reveals all kinds of sensitive information about the company to whoever might want to see it in many cases. And then finally, failure to comply results in potentially huge fines and even imprisonment for just failing to report on the nature of beneficial owners in the company. We think it's an unfair law that will really harm small companies and not do much to actually catch real money launderers. So this has been flirting around for a long time. As I said, it finally was enacted into law 5 years ago, just almost exactly. We think it's unconstitutional on top of all the other practical problems with it. So, we filed a suit in district court and won.
So even before they passed this bill, even before the regulations came out, we've been fighting against this. And Todd, as you know, you've been here 35 years. I've been here almost 25. Charging small businesses with doing government's job is nothing new, but this is a pretty big infringement. You mentioned that lawsuit. Talk to us a little bit more about what's happening. I know there are some developments right at the end of the year. Share a little bit about what's happening with that.
There are. We initially filed suit in 2022, waited more than a year, almost a year and a half for a ruling on that. And as I said before, we won that case. Naturally, the Department of Justice filed an appeal in that case, and we had those arguments in the appeal in 2023, I believe. We've been waiting forever for that ruling to come down. And unfortunately, it came down just before Christmas and not in our favor. So they overturned the district court ruling that basically said that the CTA was unconstitutional. And what had happened from that initial ruling is basically it exempted NSBA members from having to comply. We were hoping for an ultimate decision by the Supreme Court, which would say the whole law is unconstitutional and nobody has to comply. Now, in the meantime, while all this is happening, when the Trump administration came into power, and we were able to convince them that this was an unfair law. And so the agency charged with enforcing it, a group called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which is in the Department of Treasury, issued new rules that basically say that if you're not a foreign company, so if you're a domestic U.S. company, you basically don't have to do this reporting. And so they have been operating under that rule as sort of an interim rule since that time. There's two problems with that. The big benefit is it basically guts the CTA and says domestic companies who are our members, you don't have to comply, don't worry about this, which is great news. The downside of it is that it's through an executive order, and the next administration or even this administration could change their mind about that at any time. And we're right back to where we started from. So it's a very dynamic, fluid process still all these years later.
Yeah, that sure makes it tough for businesses to plan, as we hear all the time about tax policy and sunsets and things changing. That unpredictability is a huge problem. In terms of today, what do small businesses need to do today?
Well, if you're a small business owner and you're running a domestic U.S. company, not a foreign entity, you don't have to do anything. That's the good news. But you don't have to do anything for now. Things could change. That's why we think it's so crucial to get some finality to the small business community on this. So we anticipate appealing the latest ruling in our case and seeing if we can get it in front of the Supreme Court to make a decision, because we strongly feel that the law is unconstitutional on multiple grounds. While that's working its way through the process, we also want to try to get a legislative solution. So we want Congress to step in and fix the problem that it created when it passed this law in the first place, and either repeal the CTA in its entirety while it works on some alternative that might actually help with money laundering without putting all these burdens on the small business community, or simply codify the regulations that the administration put into effect last year, which has the same basic effect for the vast majority of small companies operating in this country. Either of the solutions we're going to continue to push for, and we think it's really crucial to sort of get some finality. As I said, while this law passed 5 years ago, it had been being discussed for many years before that. We've been engaged in discussions. We thought we pushed it back, and it finally passed. It's time to end the madness and put a cap on this one way or the other.
That's a great point, Todd. It is kind of madness, and I think your advice is spot on. I do want to share with people that we have a great resource center at our website, nsbaadvocate.org/CTA. There we have action alerts where you can take less than a minute, send a letter to your members of Congress, urge them to support efforts to repeal the CTA. You can get a timeline of everything that's happening. There's a wealth of information there. So check us out there and be sure to follow us on social as well. We're constantly posting updates, and we really are the leading voice on CTA. We were the first national lawsuit. We're very much in the know, and we want to make sure that you guys are in the know as well. With that, I want to thank you for joining us for Hardwired. We're happy to keep you connected and look forward to talking with you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.